focus more on the idealistic aspects and also on the Open Science Network Austria, which we're quite familiar with. Of course, if more detailed questions about policies and funding issues come up, we might have to redirect you to emailing to her directly. I think her email is in there. You can ask me for it as well, and we're going to provide the slides, of course. Also, for the English speakers who didn't hear my very long introduction about food, we're going to have a coffee break after this, and then we are going to have a lunch break at the pizzeria Casa Alberto later on. I find it important that everyone knows that. Yes. So Katharina starts her presentation with introducing you to the Open Science Network Austria. It is in fact called Open Science Network Austria, and short for that would be OSNA. But that's not doesn't have a good ring to it. The Open Science Network used to be called Open Access Network, which is when the short name OANA was established, and when the name was changed, we decided to still stick with the short versions for melodic reasons. This network is that. It doesn't have any legal form. It's a think tank. It's a couple of people, a bunch of people, meeting up regularly, thinking about what open science needs in structural terms. So the core team is built up of members of different, mostly universities, of course, but also the most important Austrian funding bodies and how's that called? Außeruniversitäre Forschungseinrichtungen. Thank you, like the Academy of Sciences. Yes, and you can see that the goals are to get everybody talking to each other and to make sure that we're all working in the same direction. These are the working groups that we currently have established in the Open Science Network. One is the Open Science Strategy working group. This working group also established the definition of open science that you heard earlier, and we're going to meet a second definition that Katharina is presenting, a new one that we both haven't seen yet in these slides later on. The second working group is called Open Science Information, and what that does is, on the one hand, we work on the website of OANA and try to keep it up to date. And the other thing is that we try to establish open and make available and initiate open science trainings, such as this. Speaking of open science trainings, as you heard, there is not a huge amount of training available yet, but I think I can already announce that there will be a lecture series at the University of Vienna in the Digital Humanities module on open science in the next semester. So yay, things are moving forward. And the third working group is the working group on legal aspects of open science, which I am probably going to talk about a little more later on in the legal session. So would you like to define for us?
No. Okay, so another definition to open science, which isn't, so it has similarities to the one we already saw. So we have one part of open science is open access to publications, then open research data, this is the same. I think maybe it is even the same, let's see. Then we have the open evaluation part, which includes the open peer review and also the impact factor or change of evaluation of research. Then we have the citizen science part, which means opening up the scientific progress itself to the public and let the public take part in this progress. And then we have the open methodology part, which includes the different things that happen in the lab and the things you build. And this is new, is that you also have open infrastructure, which means that you're open up your infrastructure, or at least make it transparent what the infrastructure is doing for you, or what you are doing, or how you are using the infrastructure. But we're going to focus only on 3 of these 6 aspects, which is open access to publications, open research data, and citizen science. So let's have a look at open access to publications. I think this is the one that is best known among people that did not encounter with open science so far. And this means that publications that are digitally published, or also print published, that they should also be digitally available for free, or for the public. And there's one important declaration in the context of this, which is the Berlin Declaration for Open Access. It's currently already been signed by over 600 institutions. I just looked it up before, and the last signee was from September this year. And in Austria, 23 institutions already signed this declaration. I'm not sure how much it covers from the Austrian scientific landscape, but I think it's quite old.
It is quite established, though. As you can see, there are quite a lot of non-university institutions listed here, and as you know, we have 21 universities in Austria, and if we have 23 signatories and so many non-university institutions, then that means that, of course, not all Austrian universities have signed yet.
I still have the chance to do so. Then another thing that helps in opening things up and in providing open access is the open access policies. And there are some institutes that already have like a document saying or stating what their policy towards open access is. So, for example, the FWF and other funding bodies also have open access policies, and when you apply to a project funded by the FWF, you automatically have to comply with their open access policy.
And as you can see, quite a lot of institutions in Austria already have open access policies. So does, at least formally, the Academy of Sciences. However, what the Academy has is not as extensive as what the Austrian Centre for Digital Humanities has. We actually have a policy that covers both. So we do make that difference in that policy. We have a policy that covers both the opening up of research results, and that in the sense of the policy, that means publications, but also the opening up of research data and research software. So this policy aims to basically enable all of the employees of the institute to openly make their stuff available, but of course also to encourage them.
Then we also have funding for open access, which is provided by currently 16 institutions. So some universities provide funding for their researchers to publish in open access, but also the FEF, so the Austrian Science Fund, also provides funding for people that want to publish in open access. And do you want to say something to this policy?
No.
Okay. So the FEF has the open access policy, which is one of the first ones that was installed worldwide in 2004 already. And it mandates open access since 2008. And also in this policy, there are some mechanisms included, as for example, publications should not only be open access, but also peer-reviewed. And then the FEF also covers for the reimbursement of the publication costs, so that nobody has to pay extra just because they have to publish open access. It has a negotiation of open access contracts with the Austrian Academic Library Consortium. In the Austrian abbreviation is KEMÖ. And it has a program for funding of standalone publications, but also for alternative ways of publishing, because publishing in a book or in a journal is not the only way to publish research results. You have blogs, you have websites, you can do podcasts, videos, whatever. So there's more to think of. And it also has a funding program for open access journals.
Okay, so the KEMÖ is the Academic Library Consortium, and you are allowed to ask questions about the KEMÖ, which I am not going to answer, but we do have some experts in the room, so if you want to know more, please do ask. The KEMÖ it's like an association, or it's a consortium. Well, and the idea behind KEMÖ basically is that it might not be so smart for every little academic library to go to the big evil publishing houses and say, hey, can we do some open access thing, please? And we might have more power if all the libraries work together and one consortium of all the academic libraries goes to the publishers and says, okay, let's talk. So that's basically the idea behind KEMÖ. And there are 10 open access agreements so far. You can see them on the OANA website if you like. And more to be negotiated, I would say. The network for repository managers is a network that one of the ACDH repository managers is a part of.
Yes, so oops. I'm part of this network for repository managers, but we also have other members here. And it's, I would say, it's an organization of all people that are somehow involved in managing a repository. There's a mailing list, a very active one, I must say, and there's regular events of which I sadly wasn't able to attend that much, but I would really like to, because they're very interesting. You also have get some trainings in, for example, licensing or other topics that are relevant to repositories. Yeah, that's a good way. So if you're somehow involved in a repository, that's like a good platform to go to. I'm not sure, do you have to be member of a repository, or can you also join in just if you're interested?
You can also join if you're interested in.
Okay, so open for everybody.
Of course.
Yeah. Then the OANA is providing also support and cooperating with open access infrastructures, and we have here a list of some of the organizations they're partnering up with. For example, there's Archive.org, which is a self-archiving platform. So if you made a publication somewhere, then you can use Archive.org to archive your publication for the public. Then we have open knowledge maps, of which we will hear more today. Yeah, and much more. There's also, for example, the directory of open access journals, which is basically a list with more functionality behind it of journals that publish in open access.
Which you can use to find resources to read, but also to find journals for your own publishing, mainly, of course. Yes, the recommendations for the transition to open access in Austria were already published in 2016, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, 2015, yeah, there it says, so on the slide, right, thank you. These were one of the first big recommendations that the OANA published. And I would say that we are currently still in the process of putting them into practice. This is a very, I'm happy and sad about this slide at the same time, because it's a very interesting time plan, but you would actually need Katharina Rieck to explain it in more detail, because I'm not very, I think there are some things that would need interpretation. If you find the time when you get the slides, check it out and ask her about it. So there are...
Also the link given here in the for the Zenodo publication brings you to the publication which explains each of these topics in the graphic again.
Learn something. So very interesting and ambitious, I would say, timeline for implementing open access in Austria. One thing I also wanted to re-emphasize is that Austria really is, and that is thanks to the FWF and the very active, open people that work there, is one of the most ambitious. So Austria is one of the most ambitious countries in terms of open access, especially when it comes to funding issues, and that is also something that is always brought up internationally. So Austria is a model in the German-speaking area, especially for open access funding. Austrian transition to open access is a big university infrastructure project that is ending next year, and that also aims at supporting the transition to open access in Austria. Surprise! They have a couple of very interesting working groups, and you should also check that out. The one working group that established the Vienna principles was the Open Access and Scholarly Communication Working Group of the Open Access Network. I think back then still Open Access Network Austria. The Vienna principles are also very interesting because they are really visionaries. So they do cover much more than just simple opening up or simple banal open access, I would say. They really aim at transforming the whole process of how research is done, and they really try to think about what would it take to really make transparent how research works. So that's a very interesting approach, one that we should always strive to fulfill. However, of course, that means that research will take longer and will have to be done much more diligently if we really want to follow all these principles. Let's move to pillar number 2, open research data.
Okay. So, open research data, which means that not only publications but also the data that you're using that leads to the publications should be opened up. And there's different projects and infrastructures that are trying to help in this process. So for example, we have the e-Infrastructures Austria project, which has 25 member institutions and has 2 rounds, so one from 2014 to 2016, and the other one from 2017 to 2019. And they have different working groups concentrating on different topics that are all relevant to research data. So for example, we have one group that is busy with thinking about research data policies. So like we already talked about open access policies, there should also be a policy about research data. Then there are there's a group thinking about data management plans, because you have to think, when you're starting a project, you have to think about what you're doing with your data and which processes it's going to undergo. And the data management plans help you in having a structured view on your data. Then there's a group working on or concentrating on metadata. Metadata is data about data, or it's information about data. So for example, the most easiest thing to understand is, for example, if you have a book in a library, and in the library catalog you can find the title, the author, the number of pages, the place where in the shelf you can find. That's all metadata about the book. Also an abstract, for example, is already part of metadata, although it's already a bit longer and more free text. And the same applies to research data, because you can always describe your data with some keywords or some other information that helps other users to understand what the data is about, when it was created, and why it was created. And then there's also the group about Go Fair. Fair is a keyword that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data and metadata. And it's something that currently is like all over the place. If you read any project proposals or writing project proposals, there's always some sentence where fair is mentioned. And it's really something you should look out, because the principles cover everything that you want, or not everything, but maybe the most important basics that you need if you want to do open science and like open up your data. I would also recommend you to, let's see if the link works. Explorer, okay. I would also recommend you to have a look at the e-infrastructures website, because you can also find all the deliverables and information about the working groups, and that there's quite useful information, especially if you want to know what is going on in Austria.
Also, a footnote, the current e-infrastructures...
The website didn't work for you, okay.
The current e-infrastructures plus project, I think it's from the first round of the project. They offer a template for research data policies, which actually served as a model for the ACDH's research data policy. So quite useful resources there too.
I think it's this one.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Closing this. Yeah. So, repositories. Something I'm concerned with. It's also the first one in the list. I didn't make the slides. It's so at ACDH we are hosting a repository called Arche, which is a resource center for humanities-related research data, and then there are other kinds of repositories for different disciplines in Austria. So, for example, we also have someone from Federa here, which is the repository at University of Vienna. And something that is not in the list, but you can find, for example, if you try to have a look at the Center for Forschungsdatenmanagement of the TU Wien, which is not a repository, but this is a service center that provides you information on how to deal with research data and which repository to choose. Where's it, Simos? Okay. And if you click a bit through, you get to a page which is called Re3 Data. Yeah, that's the... yes, so Re3 Data is a web page or is a registry of research data repositories. And the name already explains why it's Re3, because it's 3 times Re. And if you then are looking for a specific discipline, any discipline, humanities, then you get a list of centers that are, I'm not sure if the search function looks into humanities, so if in the title or also in the, no, it also looks for the tags in here. And then you can like get the list of repositories that might be useful for you. And you also get some information with these buttons up here, which demonstrate if the repository, for example, supports open access, is a certified repository, provides further information about the data and about so has a policy on how the repository itself treats data, and also if the repository provides licenses, which are useful if you want to reuse data. Das für dich.
So the Austrian Open Science Support Group is also one of the informal networks that aim to support open science in Austria, and they are also very involved in development of the aforementioned EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, which is not European, not open, not about science, and not a cloud. Yeah, so I have heard that joke so many times, so now you have to hear it too. And also sort of in the same direction, the Research Data Alliance Austria. So this is the Austrian node of the International Research Data Alliance, and it's basically also the people doing this are similar people to the ones doing the Open Science Support Group. Now, then we have the FWF's research data policy, and that might be worth looking into in more detail, of course, because what the funders want from us is, of course, interesting to us because we want the funding. The research data policy of the FWF now mandates that the projects that are that apply for funding have a research data management plan, a data or DMP, and I think they have a template for it to use. Though what I have heard, I don't know who of you has already tried to fill in, especially a templated research data management plan. Can be painful, and I can tell you unofficially that the FAF is not super strict about their data management plans, so they do understand that for some disciplines it might be more difficult to press their data into the categories that these plans imagine than for others. And also, starting this year, open access is mandatory for all the data on which the funded projects are based. So that is good news for open science. It can sometimes be bad news for the researchers, especially in the area of humanities, and we're going to touch upon that when we come to talking about Urheberrecht, because sometimes the data that we work on is not our own, and it is protected by somebody else's copyright, and that can, of course, get us into trouble. But we will talk about that in more detail later. Citizen science, we're going to speed through that because we're going to have someone, as I mentioned, Daniel Dörler, here in the afternoon who knows much more about it. So if you have questions about that, Pisaken in English, so you can talk to him in the afternoon. But just to mention the two most important networks for citizen science in Austria. One is the Citizen Science Network Austria Österreich forscht, which has been founded in 2017, and it has now been made steady at the BOKU, so that is here to stay. And they try to collect citizen science projects in Austria. So if you are a citizen who has too much free time or would like to contribute something to the progress of science, you can look for a project and contribute there. There's a lot of things about watching birds for some reason, and also butterflies. So very cool things. And then there is also the Centre for Citizen Science, which is stationed at the ÖAD. They are not competitors, so they do work together, the network and the center. Also, maybe important to know if you like to work with youngsters and kids, that the Center for Citizen Science at the ÖAD is also connected with the Young Science program that funds projects that are done together with schools. And there you have it. Sparkling Science is the funding scheme. Yes, and they also have the Top Citizen Science funding program. So here we have once again the overview of all the different areas of open science. And after the break, which is just a few minutes away, so you're in your own way in case you have questions, open infrastructures is something that we are going to hear about after the break, when Erzsébet is going to tell us a little bit about all the openness in Daria and all the things that you can openly access and use that Daria has to offer, and also what Daria does to open up things more. I hope I anticipated all that. Yeah, very good. Yes, there are also a couple of more Austrian informal networks that try to progress the openness of everything. You have them mentioned here. Finally, the Open Science Strategy Working Group of the OANA, which I mentioned before, they developed this definition that I introduced in the very beginning. They are currently trying to put that into a, say, proper paper, 25 pages, I think that counts as proper, which will explain a little bit in more detail how we define open science in Austria and what strategy that brings us to. There are already national open science strategies in few countries, in the Netherlands, namely, and in France. In France, one of the key figures in developing and implementing this national open science plan was Laurent Romary, one of the former directors of Daria. And so you can see how circles close. Yes, smart man. So, and finally, Katharina wanted to, and I will join into this invitation, wanted to invite you to the next OANA network meeting. So the OANA has a core team that meets regularly, and then a little bit, well, also regularly, but further apart, we have larger network meetings where at least one representative of every Austrian research institution comes. But of course, more than one person can come. Anyone who is interested can come and contribute their ideas and tell the OANA what they think that open science strategy making, in what direction it should go. So let me emphasize the invitation. Do join us and take part in this meeting. It's going to be in January at the Freiung again, which is good news because we used to not have that room for a while. And of course, do visit the webpage. You can find all the information that we told you here now there as well, and also all the contact addresses that lead you to Katharina and other people responsible for the OANA. And also let me add one more invitation. Since we're already on the topic of events, next year's Open Access Days are going to be in Bielefeld. They're going to be in September, and yes, they are really going to take place, and it really exists. So that is also something that you might be interested in. If you want to get more into or dive into deeper into the topic of open science, but really do be aware if you go there, it is very open access focused. So this is really an event that does also cover open science aspects, but is very focused on publications.
Thank you.